This is going to be an incredible hour. We have a guest speaker coming in today, Jack Daly, and he is phenomenal. I think this might be Jack's first time on Clubhouse, so let's be nice to him. All right, let's not beat him up too much. Jack, are you there?
I am
Jack.
on mute, and anybody that wants to take shots at me is welcome. No worries.
All right. Well, I just have to say I'm so excited because I've seen you speak, Jack, a number of times in person. And Clubhouse is a new medium. It's an social audio chat, and I'm just looking forward to hearing your philosophies again. And I want to let you know that next week we have a gentleman, Jim Bennett, who sold his company for more than 9 figures. He's coming on the show next week, and he did it using your techniques, your sales techniques. It's phenomenal. I'm going to pass this over to Michelle to launch the show today. She's our moderator. Take it away, Michelle.
Hi. As Colin said, we're super excited to have you, Jack. This is my first time meeting you, but I have seen and been following your work, your training, and your philosophies. So it's super exciting to be able to do this today. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, and it's my first Clubhouse, and so I'm anxious to get rolling.
Awesome. All right, everybody. So, since this is going to be a very fast paced 1 hour, we want to make sure that we are bringing people up to the stage quickly and getting questions from the audience up to Jack as fast as possible. So, we're going to do something a little bit different today. We're going to take full advantage of the back channel. So, if you have a question, please send a back channel message to Jeffrey. He's the guy right here at the top that says SAS on his picture. He's flashing his mic. Please just send him a back channel message, and he will look at your question because we've already had a lot submitted, and we'll bring you up onto the stage so that we can make sure that we get the questions that are in alignment and that will help everyone in the audience as quickly as possible. So on that note, Jack. So Jack is a world-renowned specialist in training sales managers and training executives to have a sales-focused organization. Not just sales focused, but sales that, actually make money. Kind of what all of us need, want. That is what it's all about here at Serial Entrepreneur Club. Figuring out what is the formula, what is the recipe. So it's really important, as we all know, to have sales managers, sales process, and a sales culture. So Jack, I'm going to kick us off with the first question. Okay. So, Jack, leverage in sales means generating, obviously, more business, but with less work. So, being very efficient. We're interested, for you to tell us, how can this be effectively done? How do we actually generate sales without, spending tons of money and spinning our wheels and not getting anywhere? Jack.
Yeah. So Michelle, you just used the key word, leverage. Let me define it for you the way I like to define it. How can I make more money with less work? How can I generate more business with less work? So let me give the listeners just a couple ideas right out of the gate. If you don't have an assistant, you are one. There are things that need to be done in sales, but not necessarily done by the salesperson. When we study top performing salespeople, what we find, no matter what industry they're in, they are maniacally focused on what I call HPAs, high payoff activities. Now, when I get hired to go into companies and try to figure out why some people are getting tremendous business and others aren't, what we find is that in most companies, more than 50% of a salesperson's time is spent on things that don't generate new customers or grow the ones you have. In other words, they're doing things that someone else should be doing other than the salesperson. And so I say, take a look at how you're spending your time as a salesperson and figure out what are your HPAs, what are the high payoff activities that you should be working on that will generate new customers or grow the ones you have. Anything else that you're doing needs to get outbound. You can either give it to somebody else in the company, you can either hire somebody outside the company, or you could just stop doing it. If we were to do just that one thing, I will guarantee you will generate more revenue, more sales, and more profits and more personal income. That's item number one, and I can go as deep as you'd like me to go there. But let me give you the next one that I call leverage, and that is model the masters. My entire life, I don't think of myself as some smart, brilliant guy. But what I do is I keep my antennae open and I'm trying to figure out where are the people that are knocking the ball out of the park? Where are the successful people? And then I want to find out how they do what they do. And so if I'm going to, if I'll go all the way back, Michelle, to when I was 13 years old and a caddy. I realized within 2 weeks that these people were playing golf during the week and the weekend. They were driving nice cars and living in big estate homes. Well, none of that applied to my father. And so there was no golf. There was no golf on the week or the weekend. The car was a 9-passenger station wagon with over 200,000 miles. And we did not have an estate home. We shared bedrooms with several kids in the same room. So I said, if I wanted to make a choice, I'd rather be them than my father when I grow up. So what I did is I took the liberty to come up with a variety of questions. And as we walked the golf course, I asked these successful people, how did they become so successful? What would they do different? What would they tell a 13-year-old that had aspirations to be successful? What would you tell me to work on? What would you tell me to stop doing, start doing? All of those types of things. And literally, I left that summer after interviewing 200 successful people and had a plan for my life to take me from 13 years old to 30 years old in 4 dimensions: financial, professional, education, and family. And when I had my North Star identified in those 4 sectors, I then had my plan built to take me there. So, model the masters and HPAs. If you don't have an assistant, you are one, and hand it off to other people.
Wow. That's insightful for me. I know I'm one of those people that like to do everything. So I think that's great advice. And, it just makes me think it helps us not get burned out and we actually focus. So thanks for that. And we have our first person on the stage, Peter. Peter has a question for Jack. And for anyone who does have a question, please also raise your hand so that Jeff can direct message you and we can get you on the stage. So, Peter, what is your question for Jack?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Michelle. Jack, nice to meet you.
You
Colin
bet.
was telling me about you last week, and I thought, boy, I'd like to come in and listen to this guy chat. So, Jack, we sell into enterprise. I'm sure you've done a lot of that. We sell a system to help companies better secure their enterprise domains and DNS. One of the challenges there is that this area is typically unowned. So everybody has a stake in it. Everybody knows it's important, but inside the organization, there's very little holistic view over it. So we hunt in, find the fox is probably a term you're quite familiar
Yep.
with. But just wondering about what your thinking is around that kind of environment where hard to find the owner, hard to find, lots of people have involvement, but difficult to find that final decision maker.
So, Peter, what is uh, the the struggle that I'm having is my style is to be very upfront with my prospects. I view them as partners even before we've done our first dance. If you can visualize a conference room setting, I don't sit on the opposite side of the table. I sit side
Right.
by with the individuals. And I'm very direct in terms of who are the decision makers. Ultimately, what will move this enterprise security forward? Have you found that to not be an acceptable practice?
Yeah, it's really about increasing the pace. So we take that approach very much. So, we write a lot of content to help people understand what their problem is, very non-sales based. It's really value add, trying to help them educate themselves about what the risks of, the managing it in a legacy environment. And that works. So then we find someone who we call the mentor, who then understands what we do, understands how it helps the organization, and they try internally through getting together with different people across different functional areas to try to compel the inside. So we do that, but it's still very difficult to get these guys to move forward, even though they know they should. But there's a lack somewhere in the organization of someone saying we need to do this. So automatically you start to think, well, you need to go higher. um, but I sometimes hate to, go over people's head, and just want to get what are your
Yeah,
views of that info?
yeah. So so. Let me ask you one more question, and then
Sure.
I'll give you some advice. What size companies are we talking about? Are we at a Fortune 1000 size?
Yeah, there and just below. So F1, F5000. So, we sort of had, there are different segments of the market, but, starting at 100 million probably,
Yeah.
but also up to the billion plus.
Yeah. Well, as you know, the 100 million size company is substantially different than the billion plus
Very
companies,
much,
right?
yeah.
Uh, on my and you took the words out of my mouth, which was sell higher up in the organization. So
Right.
when I look at $100 million company, for example, that business owner or CEO
Yeah.
is not out of my reach.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. Yeah.
Ultimately, in $100 million enterprise, that person's in all likelihood the decision maker.
You're
Um,
right.
if I go to the billion-dollar company, I don't need to be at that CEO level because there are people that are reporting to that individual, or maybe even one step lower than that. That is the decision maker. Most of my businesses that I built and run were sizable entities, but I did run some very large companies, one with 2,600 salespeople, another with $23 billion on its balance sheet, that was publicly traded. So I understand the makeup of those large companies. And quite frankly, at that $23 billion enterprise, I can assure you I was not making that decision. It was further down in the organization.
Right.
Uh, but it's the pursuit and identity of that decision maker is where we have to get to. And I appreciate the strategy of the mentor. And I'm going to give a timeline of some perspective with my mentor partner, if you will, so that they don't feel scooped. But if, we've always got to put dates out there in terms of next activities and expectations so that we move the transaction forward and we don't get blogged into bureaucracy. So I'm going to tell my mentor, hey, this is sort of where I'm coming from a time frame standpoint, so that they understand that if they're not getting us to the decision maker within that time frame, then we're going to need to take additional approaches beyond the mentor.
Okay. Okay. What about a situation where, internally they don't even know who the decision maker is?
Gosh, I heard that subtly asked by you
Yeah.
in your initial question. Now you're more direct on it, and that befuddles me. I don't buy that.
Okay.
I don't think that they're dealing you with authenticity when someone tells me that. And quite frankly, and you're learning a little bit about my style here, I would call them out on that.
Hey,
I love
Jack,
that.
I have a
Yep.
question for you. We've done now 3 or 4 episodes dedicated to sales. And I talked about mirroring, physical mirroring, and matching the rate of speed of somebody's talking as well. Is there, like, do you have any information on that or any thoughts about that? Does it actually work?
It does work. And I have a terrific book to recommend in that regard that's called The Platinum Rule. And The Platinum Rule is written by a guy by the name of Dr. Tony Alessandra. And basically, it's for lack of a better way to describe it, it's the disc profiling as to whether a person is an expressive, a driver, an amiable, or an analytical. And people do business with people they like, and they tend to like people that are more like them. And so, adjusting one's style to be more appreciative and accommodating to that particular person's style. So, as an example, my wife was an analytical, and she needed a significant amount of detail in order to make decisions. I am a driver, and I tend to go very quickly with little to no detail. The detail doesn't matter. And so, a salesperson that would be calling on me, if my wife was a salesperson as an analytical and burying me with detail, that would be a relationship that I would not be looking forward to beyond that first call. And I would end the call pretty damn quickly. So, adjusting one's style and figuring out what that person is. And in fact, when we teach this, Colin, we also say in your contact management system, put the person's personality style in your contact management system next to their name, so that before you get on the phone or you get out into the face-to-face meeting, you then say, aha, Jack's a driver. Then what do I need to do in mirroring the driver?
Oh, that's awesome. And since I'm a big believer in DISC as well, since you brought it up, can you talk a little bit about sales managers, hiring sales managers? Do we hire our best salesperson and make them the manager?
Well, I don't know whether you're intentionally throwing me a softball here, but I have found a few instances where we take our best salesperson and make them sales manager, and they're successful. I have actually found a few of those, but just note the way I'm saying it. In in most cases, what you end up doing in taking your best salesperson and making them the sales manager is you end up losing your best salesperson and get a mediocre sales manager in the trade. They're entirely different jobs. A salesperson's job: win new customers, grow the ones I have, and differentiate myself from my competitors. A sales manager's job is recruiting, training, coaching, building, and developing out a sales force. So everything that a salesperson is doing in their day to day is not preparing them necessarily for the role of the sales manager. And so we really have to be particular about what is it that we're looking for in that position and in that person. Now, I can tell you that at some stage, salespeople that are really good at selling get, I'm going to use the term burned out. It doesn't bring them the joy that it once did. I'm that guy. I was a terrific salesperson at one stage of my life. But then what I found is, gosh, when I could teach other salespeople and see their personal growth, see them doing 2, 3, 4, 5 times what they had ever done before by teaching them the proven systems and processes that I had used over the years, that was so much more enjoyable to me and rewarding to me than closing another $5 million deal, for example.
Wow. Very insightful. So Jeff has a question actually from the audience that he's going to give us.
Thanks, Michelle, and thank you, Jack. Really, really great tips. And I have a question of my own, but I'll wait till afterwards. One of the people who's listening, Vibode, asks you, my question is sales driven majorly by consumer psychology?
If you've noticed, Jeff, one of the practices that I have is I tend to ask questions before giving answers so that I get a better definition. So I'm not sure what VBOD means in terms of consumer psychology. Can we get that definition a little bit?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
And if you raise
VBOD,
your
if you're listening, if you're listening, if you raise your hand so I can find you, I'm happy to bring you up and you can answer Jack's question directly. Or if you'd rather type it, just put it in the back channel, and then I'll read it aloud for Jack. While we're waiting for that, Jack, the question I had for you real quick is, you mentioned before, if you don't have an assistant, you are one, which I liked a lot. With that, what's your thinking of that assistant? Are virtual assistants effective for a salesperson, or does it really need to be someone, by your side in your office that you could deal with?
I'm all over virtual assistants. In fact, Jeff, let me take you behind the curtain a little bit on my business. My primary core business is a professional speaker. Before the pandemic, I was averaging 250,000 air miles a year, and in 2019, I was in over 30 countries. And what I can tell you is that I have 5 personal assistants. They all work out of their homes. They all do different things. Most of them I've only met one time in my entire life, and they function absolutely perfectly. One of them has been with me for 17 years. She lives about a 45-minute drive from my home. And in those 17 years, I've probably met her maybe a dozen times. And so getting clarity about what you want out of each one of those assistants and finding ways in order to communicate effectively really unburdens you and gets the temptation away for you to micromanage and do the things that they're supposed to be doing. So I have now clients that are using virtual assistants in South America. They're using virtual assistants in India, from the United States, with great success.
Thank you, Jack. I love that. It's really helpful. I think it's something that's growing in popularity, and I've always in the back of my mind questioned, how effective it really can be. And you've just proven the point. So thank you for that. I haven't heard further from our friend who asked about the consumer psychology, so I really don't have any more color to give you on that one. Sorry.
Okay. Well, we'll be patient and see if it resurrects itself.
All right. So we have another question. So, Jack, sports teams at every level, we all know, outperform most businesses. It's an interesting comparison, and we'd like to know, what are they doing differently that we could apply to our sales organizations?
Yeah, so Michelle, that's a one-liner of mine almost everywhere I go to kind of shock my audiences. Uh, Sports teams are run better than most businesses. There isn't a coach in any sport at any level that would consider putting their players on the field without a, without a playbook and without preparation. The best salespeople are prepared before the call with best practices. And so that's part of the key is, and so I wrote this classic sales book about 7 years ago to great response from the readers, called Hyper Sales Growth. And when I wrote it, I talked about this very concept of having a sales playbook, the systems and processes that will enable you to win more than you're currently winning. And so when I talk about that, I said, get yourself a playbook. So I had this tsunami of interest that made the phone ring and our emails coming in from companies all over the world saying, I want to work with you to help you. I want you to help me grow my business. And I said, well, if you want me to do that, the easiest way for me to do that is send me your sales playbook that you're currently using, and then I will build the next iteration on top of it. Um, I will also tell you that for every 100 companies that contacted me, on average, only 2 could do that. 98 out of every 100 companies that contacted us did not have a sales playbook. So let me translate that for you, Michelle. If your company does not have a sales playbook, what that means is each individual salesperson is selling their own way. Now, if I go back to my company that had 2,600 salespeople, I used to visit over 100 offices where they were working out of, and I'd send a similar message. And that was, there aren't 2,600 best ways to sell this stuff, gang. Let's figure out the best way. Build the systems and processes, practice the systems and processes, and I bet you we beat the pants off of any of our competitors. And so that is absolutely one of the keys that we're finding with our clients that are outperforming their competitors. And, Jeff, I think mentioned, or maybe it was Colin, I'm not sure, before we got started here, that one of my clients, Jim Bennett, took a very startup type company when we first met. We grew it into a significant enterprise, which he had an incredible, favorable exit. And Jim was one of my best at implementing systems and processes and holding his salespeople accountable throughout the system. Now, I want to buckle on one more thing here, and that is this. I get hired typically about a half a dozen times a year to speak at what's called the company's President's Club or Chairman's Club, where we honor the very best salespeople in the organization. And if I can give you one example, I would take a company that I have as a client in Western Pennsylvania with 440 salespeople. And I was asked to go and speak for 3 hours at their annual get together in Cancun. All 440 salespeople were there. The chairman of the company was naming the Chairman's Club winners before I got started on my presentation. And each time he called a name out, they went on stage and they were screaming and yelling and cheering. What was interesting is that in the 7 years that company had its Chairman's Club, the number of winners averaged between 22 and 30. Now, think about this. 22 to 30 people out of 440 were rated as exceptional performers and put into the Chairman's Club. But when I peeled it back even further, what we found is that about 12 of those people were the same people all 7 years. Now, let's think about it. They had the same economy. They had the same competitor. They had the same product. They had the same price. They had the same service deliverables. But these dozen folks out of 440 delivered consistent year after year exceptional results. Here it is. It's model the masters. Find out what your very top performers are doing, incorporate it into what I call systems and processes in a sales playbook, then get the rest of the organization to practice the proven systems and processes. That is the way top performing coaches would go about running a sales organization if they left the sport that they're in.
Excellent. So just, we have a lot of folks that are new entrepreneurs, new startups. Just could you just throw out to us a couple of examples of the types of, real physical things that are in the playbook?
Sure. That's a fair question. So I like a playbook that has 2 parts to it. One part is the sales management side of the house. The other part is the sales side of the house. So on the sales management side of the house, some of the things that we want to talk about there are how to go about recruiting. Finding a way to put your recruiting process ingrained in the organization. You should have a recruiting process, and if we want later on here on the program, well, I can detail out some of what that process looks like. We should have a coaching in the playbook for sales managers, joint coaching training, coaching, and training and 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 the act of going out side by side with the individuals, taking them through that in the playbook. In addition to that, on the sales management side, we want to go and talk about how do you effectively role practice. Now, let's move over onto the sales side of the house. On the sales side of the house, typical items in a playbook might be goal setting process, high payoff activity identification, and what that process of holding people accountable will look like. So that how often are we meeting with our salespeople? What are we looking at when we're meeting with our salespeople? Another topic that's going to be covered in the sales playbook is proactive pipeline management. And I like to talk about two baskets connected to one another: a basket of prospects, people who have never done business with us before. When they start to do business with us, we call them a customer. And customers ultimately, in the finest of sales organizations, transition into becoming clients. And there is a big difference between a customer and a client. A customer, if I were to have 10 products, buys one of them every 3 months, let's say. A client buys 7 of the 10 on a regular, ongoing monthly basis. And so successful salespeople build what's called a clientele. Well, the process that we do that is by inspecting what we expect in the baskets of prospects, customers, and clients. Another topic that we would want to include in the sales playbook for salespeople is what I call a touch system. Now, I don't have the energy in terms of time here to give us the details of building a touch system, but what I can say is that the most recent study available says that it takes 9 touches before a prospect even knows that a salesperson exists. And worse yet, most salespeople quit at 5 or less. And if that's all you've done, you've wasted your time, your money, and your efforts. And so the problem with touches is, and a touch, by the way, is any way that we reach out and let somebody know that we exist. And so it could be an email, it could be a snail mail, it could be a face-to-face, a phone call. And so the problem with those is so often those touches are all about the company. And what we have to do is we have to mix it up and not just touch them about what our product is about or what our service is about, because that just feels like you're trying to sell me, and people do not want to be sold. Our job as a salesperson, the subtle difference, help them to buy, help them with their needs, their opportunities, and their problems. That should be our mainstay as a salesperson. And so when we're touching those prospects, customers, and clients, we need to be touching them with a multitude of different things. You could be touching them with specific ideas that will help them in their specific industry or business. In addition to that, you could be touching them with general business info and ideas. For example, when I remarked to Colin, the book, The Platinum Rule. And so that might be an applicable thing for me to pass on to somebody that could help them in their business. We could touch them with things we know about them personally. For example, I'm a marathoner. I'm a triathlete at the Ironman level. I'm a golfer. I enjoy a great glass or bottle of wine. And so there's a variety of things that if anyone were to go to my website, it would become very clear very quickly that I have these personal tastes. So a very sharp salesperson in building their touch system would go and do their homework on me. And maybe when the Wine Spectator magazine comes out with the top 100 wine list for the year, maybe that person would forward it on and say, hi, I know that you're a guy that likes a good bottle of wine, Jack. Here's the top 100 Wine Spectator rated wines this year. And so we mix up the medium in which we touch them. We mix up the content that we're delivering to them. And that starts to break the barriers down. And again, if you're going to stop
I think Jack lost his sound. Can you hear him, Jeff and Colin?
No, I cannot.
All right, he's on
So
mute.
maybe it's time to maybe do a reset for the room
Yeah,
there, Michelle.
let's do a little reset. We are at the halfway mark. We are listening to Jack Daly. Jack Daly is a renowned author globally for sales coaching of high performance organization. And he's not just, a coach, right? That just said, I'm going to coach people. He's actually done it and ran several successful organizations. And now he helps others convert their organizations to high performing cash cows, let's just say. So, Jack, we're going to run to the next question. We have Tej here on the stage. Tej, the floor is yours. What is your question, please, for Mr. Daly?
Thanks, Michelle. Hey, Jack, you're awesome, man. Tage here. I can listen to you for days and weeks and have a conversation about geeking out on sales and sales leadership with you. So I'll start with a question. So in consultative sales, I think you used to be a CPA, so attorneys, bankers, lawyers, etc., right? Long sales cycle, consultative sales. Whether you're a startup or going after large companies, the toughest part is staying in touch with prospects, converting them in a long sales cycle between prospect, customer, and client. The biggest question we get asked is, how do you tactfully stay in touch without being annoying? Because if you don't stay in touch, you get forgotten. So I'm curious to know, what would be the top 3 tips someone like you, with your expertise, would offer someone who's going after large companies, long sales cycles? How do you stay in touch but not be forgotten, but not be pushy? I'm curious what you have to say. My name is Tage. I'm done.
Hey, Jack, it looks like you're on mute. If you could just tap the mic.
Got it. Well, Tej, I don't know whether you caught the last section where I went in depth with the touch system, because I don't want to repeat all of what I just covered. But there was an awful lot that had to do with your particular question here. So in that long sales cycle, Tej, the key is staying in touch with them, and bringing them value along the way. So if my target, for example, are accounting firms or CPA firms, as you gave as an example, I'm going to subscribe to the material that a typical accounting firm would be subscribing to, the magazines that are unique to that industry, the podcasts that are unique to that industry. I want to stay up to speed on the things that they need to be better at what they're doing. And along the way, through a variety of different means, whether that's sending them an email or sending them a text or sending them a piece of snail mail, or just giving them a heads up by way of leaving them a voicemail. I'm just going to pass along some of the things that I'm aware of in their industry. Now, what's interesting, Tej, is this, that they should be aware and reading those same materials. But the act that you are doing it as well and passing those things along gives you a leg up from the people that aren't doing that and are calling on them. Typically, what we find is what salespeople are doing is trying to sell their services to the account.
Jack, we lost you again.
Looks like your mic is muted, Jack.
Apart from your product or service.
We lost a little bit of what you said, but if I might recap and correct me if I'm wrong, Jack, really know what your target customer that you want to convert, as you said, Jack, using your language, to a client, where they are, what their interests are. You're going to endure yourself. And they know that it might not be your interest, but as I think I understood you, Jack, it shows that you're trying to establish a relationship and you're not just in it to sell to them.
Yeah, business people do business with people they like, and when we tend to kind of buddy up, if you will, and build these relationships that transcend the business. We share a passion for golf, or we share a passion for wine. Two of my examples that I gave earlier. In fact, this afternoon, I have a business relationship that's been going on now for 20 years, where we're going to play golf this afternoon. We're going out to dinner this evening when we're both fond of great wine, and we each have a bottle that we're bringing to see if we can outdo each other. That relationship 20 years ago was dark. It did not exist. It was a cold call that started out. But over time, it evolved into now we're just two friends who happen to do business together. And that is the beauty of the best place to be as a salesperson.
I love what you just shared, Jack. I appreciate that. And the greater I serve, the less I sell. So building the relationships before you even need them or call on them is something that we've been doing. But I'd love to hear it from you, since you have more expertise than anybody here on stage. So awesome answers, my friend, and I love what you had to share. Thank you.
Hey,
Yeah. So one last thing there. I have my 10th book at my publisher, with a target release in January. It's a lot of effort to write a book. It's a lot of time to write a book. I also have my own personal magazines that you can get on my website at jackdalysales.com. Then you can download them for free. Writing a magazine is a big effort, takes a lot of time and effort. Now, why would I do those things? Well, those are lead generation tools for me in my business. But what's interesting is that 30% of all of the leads that are generated by those mechanisms, I give to other folks that I think are better suited for what the need of the prospect is. And that sounds a little bit like lunacy. Like a guy is hiring, wants to hire me, and I'm saying, "Gosh, Tej, you would be better served by going with Pete rather than Jack, because Pete's a specialist in this particular area that you're asking me to get involved in. I can certainly do it, but he'll get it to you quicker, cheaper, and better than I could ever do it." But what's interesting now is that same person who contacted me originally gets satisfied with the person I moved him over to, and a year later calls me up and says, "Hey, I want to hire you to do sales training for our company." By the way, how many other sales trainers do you think that guy called? And the answer is zero. And the reason that he didn't call anyone else is because he now trusts me. Selling, at the end of the day, selling is the transfer of trust. People do business with people they trust. And because I put people in the best position for their need, their pain, their problem, when I do that, and I do that consistently, I will end up generating a lifetime of business based on trust and relationships and referrals.
That's great advice, and you know, I agree with you, right? Then you're their trusted partner, and right, everybody wants to make more money, do better in their job, and keep their job. So who better to partner with, right? If you're selling a product. So thanks for that insight, Jack. We have another question, the next question. But before I go there, Jack, you're throwing out so many, really good resources. And I even didn't know that you had so many books out. I know you do seminars. I'd love for you to send Rachel and I over a list of your books. But could you tell us a little bit, and just in the event that anyone's interested in knowing about your seminars and conferences, could you just give us kind of like a high level overview of that? And also, anyone who's on the session, if you sign up for our email alerts on startup.club, we will also send out a recap of these resources and information about Jack's seminars early next week. So, Jack, could you just give us a little bit of information? I know I would like to go to one.
Sure. Thanks for that. With the pandemic, I took my before pandemic live workshops where people would buy a seat for the day, and moved them into um, into virtual. And I have built a studio in my home. So we do a workshop for 4 hours virtually on sales management, the recruiting, training, coaching, building, and developing out salespeople. Our next one scheduled is September 15th. And the following week, on September 22nd, we do one on sales, again, virtually, 4 hours of going through the proven systems and processes and the contents of what makes a sales playbook for a salesperson. I can tell you that we typically have somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 100 people. Last month, when we did our workshops, I will tell you that we had 15 different states represented from the United States in the workshop, and we also had 7 different countries attending. And I will also note that when we were doing these things live, we typically drove the attendees by way of where they lived locally. But the opportunity to do these now virtually has made it a worldwide event, which I think is even more powerful. And as some of the attendees have said to us, gosh, when you used to do these live, I might have been in the back row. Everybody has a front row seat on this virtual thing, and it's as interactive as anyone wants it to be. So on my website, jackdalysales.com, we have a list of all of the scheduled sales management and sales workshops there.
Beautiful. And you know what I'm thinking? We have a great group here, and I know everybody's enjoying hearing these tips. If you sign up for the email newsletter, um, we'll be sending out, like I said, the resources Jack's mentioning early next week. I'm also going to do a little contest. So we'll send out maybe a couple of questions, and the first people to reply, we're going to give away 5 of Jack's books too. So if you're interested in getting a free book and hearing a little bit more, please be sure to sign up for the email list.
Jack, I had a question for you. This is Jeffrey up right above you with a somewhat related, given how important relationship building is in sales, especially as Tej said, when there's a long sales cycle, I've noticed that a lot of tech companies now are really hot on the idea of using an SDR, a sales development representative, to first go out there and in many cases really build that relationship. And then suddenly you get handed off to the closer or the person is to sell you, but you really don't have the relationship with that person. You've developed a relationship with the SDR. What are your thoughts on that practice, and how does that fit in the scheme of the sales management structure?
What a great question, Jeff. That practice of leveraging the SDR fits very nicely in that discussion that I had earlier about if you don't have an assistant, you are one. I had built a company back in 1998 that was ranked number 10 on the Inc. 500 and was honored as Entrepreneur of the Year from Ernst & Young. And I had about 120 salespeople in the organization, and we made the phone ring for those salespeople. They didn't have to go out of the call center to go find anything. They didn't have to do outbound. We were television and radio and direct mail, and we were very good at making the phone ring. But what I was disappointed with was that out of the 120 salespeople, we only had about a dozen of them that really could do a quality job of closing them into real business. And as a result, after beating myself up, trying to train these 120, we actually turned them into teams where we had the person that was really good at closing, managing about 8 to 10 of these SDRs to do the preliminary work and then also follow-up work, and found that practice to be very, very effective. Now, in that particular business, that model worked. The question I always ask my clients when I'm asked about this SDR is we need to understand what the nature of the prospect is, whether that process of dealing with an SDR and then a handoff is going to be accepted, if it's going to be looked upon in a favorable light. In the business that I just described, my clients and my prospects had no issue whatsoever with it. However, I have other business clients where that model just doesn't work very well. People don't appreciate the handoff and start to consider, is there an alternative company that I could be really talking to the higher quality salesperson right out of the get-go. So it has some dependency upon the industry and the industry in which you're calling, but I am a fan of it under the broad umbrella of working on the things that are most important to getting the deal done.
Yeah, I think that's great, Jack. Thank you. So there is no universal playbook across all businesses and all verticals, right? You got to find the right mix that works for your business.
Absolutely, Jeff. When you use the word playbook there, we don't subscribe to a chop a block playbook. We don't have, we're contacted by some firms and they think that we're in the business of just handing them the skeletal playbook for them to use. Every one of our clients that builds a playbook, that playbook is unique to them. And I would also tell you that we encourage it not to be put in a binding book, but something where you could take pages out and put new pages in, because it should be a living document. And if I can go back to the sports analogy, I want it to be like the sports coach, where we're putting new plays in all of the time. I grew up in the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area. I live in Southern California today, but I grew up in Philly, and I've always been an Eagles fan, and we waited 50 years for them to win the Super Bowl. But one of the key plays was the Philly special, and that had never been in any playbook prior to that game that we won the Super Bowl on. And here's a team that made it all the way to the Super Bowl and through the playoffs, using a playbook that was changing from game to game based upon new information being available.
Fantastic.
Great. I think Dan had a follow-up question to this process, so I brought Dan up on stage. Dan, did you have a question for Jack?
Yes, Jeffrey, thank you. Jack, I was just curious on any specific examples, maybe of types of businesses, sectors where the SDR handoff is not appreciated.
It's a good question, Dan. So, we talked earlier with Tej about attorney firms, professional service firms, accounting firms. Very often, that SDR approach is not thought of highly in those arenas.
Great. You reminded me of something that we do in one of our businesses, actually. The whole point about establishing a relationship, talking to people like people, right? Because people like, people they want to be friends with. One thing that we do at Meowingtons, even though it's consumer oriented and all online, is the people that we hire actually to do the social media and content are also selling, but they are also part of the demographic. So they're so in tune with the demographic. So it's good to hear what you're saying about, outsourcing, so to speak, and hiring assistants. But for me, I think it applies your principle is really establishing that relationship. And for us, it's really like having people that are part of that demographic to help us do so.
Hey, Michelle, this is that you just put a big smile on my face. My work with social media and catering to the demographic and so forth. I have one of my assistants that does some of that work. I have an outside firm that does some of that work. And I personally am active in whether it's Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn, and I will occasionally weigh in there. What's really humorous to me is from time to time, somebody that's gone to a number of my events will weigh in and say, "Hey, by the way, I know this one isn't Jack because it's not in his words the way he would articulate it." And I quote unquote get busted occasionally, but it's all in good humor because people do understand that there are third parties that are involved in so much of the social media action.
Awesome. This has been a fantastic session. Just to recap here, if you want to learn more about Jack's books, he just told us he's working on his 10th and he has many seminars. Please sign up for our newsletter. We're also going to be giving away 5 of his best-selling book. Colin, I'd love for you to close out this session and wrap it up for us.
Yeah, I mean, my gosh, Jack, you're amazing. You really are. You're something. I've seen you speak a number of times again this hour. I got so many good ideas. And in this show, we do a serial entrepreneur every 1 hour every Friday at 2 o'clock Eastern. And our goal is to crack the code, to figure out what serial entrepreneurs do over and over again to start, scale, exit, and repeat that process. And my good friend Jim Bennett, he's coming on next week. And he is really, did a phenomenal job building a sales culture within the company that he started. And I'm telling you, we're in for a big treat next week. Every show is recorded. You can get the last, I think we probably have about 30 or 40 shows that have been recorded, and they are on at startup.club. Last thing I will ask you, Jack, is we have about 650,000 members in our club, and we've talked about doing a paid conference on Clubhouse in the next 3 to 6 months, and we would definitely, invite you to that conference as well. So, all good, great show.
That would be great, Colin. And I would just close them and re-endorse Jim Bennett. The guy, every time that I got an opportunity to work with Jim and his people, the guy literally cannot sit down in the seat. His energy is infectious, and he's a wild man. But he's a wild man in the highest regard of respect. He is a guy that hears an idea, and literally, as it's still coming out of my lips, he's made an announcement to his people in the room. That's what we're doing. We're going to make this happen right now. This is policy today. So your members are going for a real treat if they tune in to Jim.
Fantastic. I'm making my little list right now. First one is hire a virtual assistant, right? If you're doing the work, then you're the assistant. Thank you for that, Jack. Secondly, I'm putting on my calendar to tune in next week at 2 p.m. to hear Jack Bennett. That sounds really exciting. And then thirdly, I'm going to make sure I'm signed up for the startup.club email list. So thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful weekend. Be safe. And thank you, Jack.
You bet.